Welcome to ConCensis, a podcast from Censis Technologies. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of ConCensis. I'm your host today, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the program. Today, we're going to be discussing Censis AI Squared Productivity, which delivers complete visibility into SPD productivity, leveraging the power of AI. So we're going to get into some insights into the capabilities that this platform has to really transform your organization. And we're going to talk to two people who have a great deal of experience working with Censis AI Squared Productivity and a product expert from the Censis side as well. So let me introduce them to you now. First, we have Seamus Johnson, Senior Director of Application Development at Censis. Seamus, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely thrilled to have you on today, man. And we're also thrilled to be joined today by Jeff Long. He's the Network Director of Sterile Processing at St. Luke's University Health Network. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
And last but not least, we have Cody Trout, Director of Central Sterile at Williamson Medical. Cody, welcome.
Thank you, Tyler. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So, guys, before we dive in, I want to give the audience an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better, get to know your work and what you do. And so let's start off. I gave a brief introduction for all of you, but Jeff, kick us off. Tell us a little bit more about your role and what you do on a regular basis.
Well, I'm the Network SPD Director for approximately 12 sites. That includes 13 SPDs. Responsible for one educator. I have one quality compliance and safety coordinator. I have a resource coordinator that's also our database or CensiTrack manager, and five managers managing the 13 sites. And we actually support multiple endoscopy sites as well. Just real quickly about me, I've been in the field for over 30 years. Started out as a flight medic in the Air Force. Background in OR as a scrub technician, many years as an SPD technician and SPD management.
Excellent stuff. Thanks for that, Jeff. Cody, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role.
Yeah, so I'm Cody, I'm Director of CS at Williamson Medical Center. Jeff, that's interesting. You were in the Air Force. I didn't know that about you, so I just learned something new. I was in the Air Force as well.
Oh, great.
So something in common there. But manage the CS department here with oversight for everything high-level disinfection. Just the one site, so I don't have multiple sites like Jeff does, but just the one site.
Excellent stuff. Thank you for that, Cody, as well. And so wrap us up, Seamus. You're a return guest here on the podcast, but for people who maybe missed your previous episode, give us a little introduction into Seamus.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with Censis now since 2003. For most of that time, I wrote code, so I was a software engineer. Today, I help us figure out what cool new things we should go and build next to help our customers solve their biggest problems.
I love it. That's a really nice and succinct answer. Good stuff, Seamus. So Cody and Jeff, tell us a little bit about why you were searching for tools to help you measure productivity in your sterile processing departments. What was it that kind of put you on the pathway for this search?
Oh, I guess I'll go first. In my previous position before I came on board here at St. Luke's University Hospital, I was responsible for the metrics, the data presentation for the OR meetings and our PI performance improvement meetings and things like that. And it would take me anywhere from 2 to 3 days per week just to collect the data and then to put it into Excel and then pivot tables. So I had also a couple years ago received my green belt in lean management and my black belt in lean management. So I was exposed to that different world of identifying problems and then measuring and then reporting metrics. So that's how I became interested in it. And then one day when I was speaking to Seamus when I came on board here, he told me the timing was perfect. They had something hot on the oven or hot on the stove and they were working on it. So that's when we teamed up together and discussed it.
Piping hot updates from Seamus on cool products.
Yep.
Cody, tell us a little bit about that process for you as well. What kind of set you on this path?
So I'm kind of a data nerd anyway. Deep into spreadsheets and that type thing. I had initially developed kind of a non-biased way to evaluate my staff, and so I wanted to take all the fuzzy feel-goods out of it, attach numbers to it, and true key measurements that were repeatable and relevant. And I even spoke about it with a few other podcasts and started a real conversation about it. Already being a Censis customer, Seamus had reached out to me. We'd done some projects in the past, and he said, "Hey, can you give us your opinion on this thing?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." And so it was great to see that the market was responding to the needs that not just me, but other managers were putting out there about access to our data, what we're actually doing, what do these things really, truly look like instead of what do I think they look like, and 10 million spreadsheets and all that, just all that.
I totally agree. As leaders, we were starving for data to make decisions. And, some of the common themes I had heard is, well, you're a director. Why don't you know that? And I understand that, but, the information doesn't always filter or flow in the direction it should. And, it's unique that Cody has one big site. We probably have the same amount of employees, but he's got them all in one place, and I have them all over the regional area. But, our view is different because I have multiple sites. His view is different because he's large in one area, centralized area, but it's probably a big, huge campus to get from one place to another takes forever. But in my respective area, I have to drive far, and we don't always have our finger on the pulse unless we are made aware or we actually see it.
Yeah, and I think what you just said, man, that was really key. Like we knew, or we thought that we knew what the right decisions were, but we needed the proof. We needed the support to prove that was the right decision. Yeah. So I think I'm kind of getting ahead a little bit. I'm sorry, I want to jump ahead, but passionate about this kind of thing. But Jeff, nail on the head, man.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Cody.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just being able to put hard data to what your assumptions already were, or maybe that the data kind of showed you that you were not going in the right direction. And that's so helpful just to be able to say, hey, look, this is what the numbers are telling us. And I think that's absolutely right. And very, very well put by both of you. So I want to kind of get a lay of the land of the industry right now, just as it currently stands from a staffing perspective, SPD operations and productivity, all the different things that you're seeing out there. So starting off with those staffing shortages and challenges, finding and retaining qualified staff. Jeff and Cody, what challenges are you having when it comes to trying to staff these departments? Cody, kick us off with this one.
Wow, what a conversation around staff. How long have I got? No. So the staffing and the job market has changed, and that's being very, very generous. It's being very nice. So pre-COVID, let's say a year before COVID, if you had an opening, you would put your posting out, local market, online, whatever it was. And, by the time you were 2 weeks into a posting, you're calling or emailing HR to take the posting down. I can't get through all the applicants. Just take it down. I'll sort through what I got and I'll make a decision from there, as opposed to now, in this post-COVID world where so many experienced employees have left the industry, have either just left because it was no longer, the risk reward wasn't there, or they've started traveling, or what reason or another. Now, same facility, same reputation, better pay because all the pay rates have went up. You put a posting out and it just sits there for months. And then you call your HR, can you change the verbiage? Can you repost it? Can you bring it back to the top? What are some other tricks you got? I've never seen such a change in recruiting in such a short period of time. And that's led to more SPDs using travelers, right? And so for whatever reason, staff changed. And so you've got this influx of travelers across the industry, and it's a combination of things. Is one, it's just raising our operating costs because travelers cost more. But two, you're losing history and you're losing experience and you're losing consistency and buy-in because travelers, even the best traveler, is there on a temporary assignment, right? And so that's not a knock on travelers. They're great for what they are. They're a tool to be used, but they don't have buy-in. They're not concerned about their children more than likely, their children having a procedure there, or their parent or sibling or whatever. There's not that emotional investment that you would with an employee that lives in the community or close to it, or that may be a patient at that community, that facility. Something, to that effect. And it's even to the point now that we're a couple of years into this thing where, you have to be building for the future constantly. And so, we lost experience. And so that changed our pool. And then the management side of SPD CS markets is growing. There's an interest in it now. There's an interest across the C-suite, across the industry itself, different vendors, educators. And so there's this growing need for that. And so when you pick a manager, an educator, whatever that spot that you need to fill is, you're going to attempt to take the top tier employee. Well, then you're taking away from your productive employees. And you couple that with the fact that now you're having trouble recruiting new employees to train. And so, that forces you from a director's perspective or a manager's perspective, and really should be even a team lead's perspective, is you have to constantly be training your replacement. You have to constantly train your replacement, because if you go into a facility, whether you come up through it or you relocated for it, whatever the case may be, you're ahead of that facility at some level. Eventually, you're going to leave. You're going to not make it to work one day. You're going to get promoted to another facility, higher up, whatever the case may be. You're going to leave one day. One of the worst things that can happen is you leave your position and your department, your whatever it is, fall apart. Right? That's not an indicator of a good leader. And so, that being said, you have to constantly be training your replacement, and not just one, but maybe two or three options, and that's a constant flow. Jeff, what are your, how does it look in your?
Yeah, thanks, Cody. When I first got here at St. Luke's 14 months ago, one of my three top goals, the staffing was so bad, was retention, hiring, and time and attendance. All three of those go together. We had so many vacancies. At the time, we were in about the 25th percentile for vacancy rate. We're at about 12% right now. But that was one of our, because you have come up time, you have orientation, you have those that have institutional knowledge. I think, Cody, you alluded to that already about having that institutional knowledge. But, those folks have to share that information about how the workflow is and how things work and how the OR likes it, the customer likes it. So there's a lot of orientation time. What used to take 6 weeks to go through orientation for someone is now taking 12 weeks because we're hiring individuals with very little SPD experience or no SPD experience. And so that's where we had started off in the beginning. And so what we're finding as far as the skills, I've mentioned it already, is that we're hiring individuals with no previous SPD experience. We have to fall back now on personality traits and behavioral traits because we can teach them this skill. And so one thing I would like to mention, though, how we tie that back into Census AI Square is, we had Census for a long time. We just didn't have really any data or metrics to show which direction we needed to go. When I got here, we didn't have an educator or a quality person. We didn't have a database specialist to manage the CensiTrack system. So in order for me to right size that, and even for our budget, our staffing budget, we don't have a staffing budget per se. Our amount of staffing is based upon the metrics, and we have a unit of service type of metrics, and that's what determines our staffing needs. So I needed data, and the fact that we had baseline data already in CensiTrack was very instrumental in at least getting our baseline data and having a starting point to show how much staffing we needed at each individual site and maybe where we needed to move individuals. One thing that we were able to identify also with the baseline data that we had was the fact that we would benefit from a float pool. So we took 5 technicians and created a position, new job description, and we posted it. We had 5 internal individuals that were certified and well trained. And now what they do is they travel from our large site to the sites where they're needed. And that has helped tremendously with our metrics. And we've improved at least 20% our metrics. We've gone from the red to green on every one of our sites now because we have the right resources at the right place at the right time.
And I wonder, Jeff, just from your perspective, is that with instrument tracking systems, the longer that you have them in place and the longer you're able to keep staff, then you're able to have staff that become experts in these systems, right? And that can really be beneficial to the organization as a whole, right? When people know and understand how to use something like CensiTrack.
Right. And as most of everybody in SPD knows, I know Cody knows this, Seamus knows this, I know everyone knows this, the source of truth is the count sheet. If your count sheet is inaccurate or if it's got discrepancy, maybe it's not clear even. That's your source of truth. We live and die. That's our expression in SPD. You live and die by the count sheet. Same thing with preference cards or pick tickets. If those things aren't right, then the customer will let you know and you will have problems. So having a database instrument tracking system that's maintained is key to this whole process. And that's one thing that I was able to present to senior leadership, through the use of the CensiTrack AI square and through other types of metrics. And it helped with that decision making because, the last thing that any leader wants to do is go into a senior's C-suite and say, I need more staffing. They'll get up from behind the desk. They'll say thank you, and then walk you to the door, and you'll never see that office again. But there is a way to do it, and it's through data, and it's through having a good plan. But you've got to be able to demonstrate it on one page the need, and you have to be able to show the evidence.
That's a really, really good point. And a lot of what I've heard from people is that. That when it comes to staffing, you have to show that you're maximizing the resources and the staffing that you already have, right? And that comes from having the data at your fingertips.
Yeah, you have to be a good steward of what they've already given you. You have to prove that you're. And then what Jeff was saying as well. The one pagers is one of the people that impacted me growing up said to always have an elevator speech in your back pocket. Because you never know when you're going to get on the elevator and your chief, whatever title, is going to be on there. And you need to have that in your back pocket ready to go basically at all times. And data is something that they'll most always listen to.
Seamus, we've let you sit quietly for probably too long in this conversation. Anything to add to what you've heard from Jeff and Cody so far?
Yeah, so we've heard similar stories like this about staffing issues from basically every customer we talk to. I think, COVID was tough on this industry. Nobody wants to put their life at risk necessarily, right? And it's a tough job anyway, and then you couple that with the fact that the wages for retail have come up. And if you're young and you're looking for an entry-level position and you have to choose between, working at Target where you've got air conditioning or working in decon, right? For the same wage where you might get stabbed with a K-wire or something like that, it's tough to recruit people. It's tough to, I think honestly, working in the medical field is probably long-term a better career decision. But it is tough for young folks to see that, I think.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I think just well laid out, explaining some of the challenges that we're seeing in this area right now. So Jeff, Cody, let's move on and talk a little bit about visibility and the challenges that you're running into when it comes to limited visibility into operational processes in your departments. So Cody, this is something that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I want to come back to it, is that you had suspicions about what was going on in your department, but you had difficulty validating that intuition. Tell us a little bit about that, and then, that limited visibility aspect of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so had these ideas, assumptions, suspicions about the ongoings in the department and when they were happening, sometimes how they were happening. And, I had an overhead, I had an eye in the sky from a scan point perspective. I can see when a tray moves, where it's at, who did it, exactly what time, and all that stuff. And I can see things moving, but to take multiple employees, hundreds of trays and pill packs every day, it difficult to put all that data in your head just based on scan points. I would almost argue impossible.
Yeah, Cody, can I ask you a question real quick? We can see, they're building trays, or we can see that they're scanning and decontam, but there's always that gray area where there's no scans. And, as leaders and decision makers, we always question those areas, and it's a difficult position for everyone to be in, because you don't want to blame someone or accuse them of something. But you do have questions, and it's a difficult topic to address sometimes. And, by having the correct scans or this correct process points for scanning, that helps a lot too. And then that's a good thing about having the AI square, is then you can have an open conversation more easily.
Yeah. And you were talking about scan points, and I think that's really facility specific. I've been at some facilities where it felt like the more scan points we had, the better. And then the facility I'm at now, that's, maybe not the case. Maybe we don't need to scan to the drying rack every time, or maybe we don't need to scan every time somebody opens a cart washer, because the work's getting done, and the team seems to really, for the most part, spread the load. And so, do we want to be scan happy, right? And so you got to capture data. You got to capture those points. You got to have accountability. But at the same time, I want my team inspecting and assembling, not scanning. And so there's that right number of points. And I think that changes depending on the culture and size and throughput of the department that it's in, because I've seen both sides of that. But when we plugged in the Censis AI squared, and we started seeing some of the imagery that come through, the way that the data was presented, just looking at that, Tyler, to answer your question, it allowed us to make tweaks. And I think that you could use it as like a mass cleanup tool, depending on where your department's at, what your department history is, what your location at that facility is. I think you could use it to do a mass cleanup. I think you could learn, if you were walking in on the job day one and you had that tool, you could learn an enormous amount about your technicians, your department or multiple departments, like just literally from studying a handful of tabs.
Yeah, if I could jump in there for a second, Cody, I just want to add on to what you were saying before I lose my thought. Seamus and I were sharing the Censis AI Square with one of our C-suite senior business strategists. And one of the things that he focused on right away was in the, I think it was estimated time or something like that of working, where it said other. And, he was like an eagle eye, and he focused right in on that other. And so, my facility here, we were focusing on decontam scans, sterilization, prep and pack. And then we're probably not scanning process points enough. So we had one site that had under 10% other. We had another site that was around 40% other. And that right there, you know, as an experienced director or manager, you know, you focus right in on those types of things. So, you know, good point about the scans, though. You have to have the correct scans and the right information. You have to be collecting the right data.
Yeah. It's not enough just to measure it. You got to measure the right stuff.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you had a thought. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
But what we used it here because I've had a couple of years here, and we've did a lot of cleanup, a lot of improvement in the couple of years that I've been here. We used it to fine tune what we were already doing, and there's certain, like I was saying, suspicions that I had. I thought ways that we could improve, but I didn't. The changes that I wanted to make were going to disrupt some of my employees' lives, right? And at the end of the day, you know, they're the reason I'm here, right? It's all about the patient, but it's also all about the employee. You know, we're doing life together, and so before I'm going to ask somebody to, hey, can you come in an hour later from now on, or an hour earlier from now on, or how do you feel if I just completely flip your schedule over? You know what I mean? Because you know, Seamus, if I ask you to change your schedule by 2 hours, well, how's that going to affect your kids' soccer games, your wife's, you know, dinner, or, you know, it's going to change everything. It's a domino effect. And so I didn't want to go to my staff and just start changing schedules based on a hunch or a suspicion or an assumption. And so when this data presented itself and it did it in a visual manner, I'm like, yes, I can visually see what it would look like if I moved this pond to B3. I know what's going to happen. And so I took the information to the staff that I wanted to change, took the information to them, and they were all supportive. It fell in line. The people that requested the change and presented them with the why, they were willing to make the change, and it yielded positive results from productivity. It raised our quality. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later more about that, but it raised their productivity, their quality. And it changed some of them's, I don't want to go so far as to say it changed their feelings about work or their feelings about here, but I feel like some of them had a little bit more job satisfaction because, you know, there were less inconsistencies and they were more productive. And so, you know, when you show up to work and you do your job and you have a good day and you're more productive, like you feel better about doing your job. You know what I mean? I still gave you 8 hours, but I got 2 more done. And the only thing I did was, you know, I came in an hour later. I come in 2 hours later. But I gave you more with basically the same amount of effort.
Right. Cody, if I could jump in on that too, you know, years ago I had learned that, you know, you should never ever use your instrument tracking system as a disciplinary tool unless you absolutely have to, of course. You know, there is a time and a place for that. But the main purpose of it is not for disciplinary actions, that type of thing. It's for improvement. It's for tracking, those types of things. But what I had learned over a long period of time is, you know, with the tracking system, I forgot where I was going with this, but I'll work on that. Is that, what we did was with our tracking system is we used it as a tool to communicate with our employees. And, you know, we showed them we shared in the early stages the ConCensis AI Square, you know, what was being built. Every month a new module was coming out and we were showing them the data and they were like, wow, we really do that much work. Wow, I can do better than that. You know, I didn't realize that person was really working that hard. You know, I thought she was kind of a slow person, you know, that kind of thing. We had folks that would work really, really, really hard for 2 or 3 hours and then just take an extra 2 or 3 hour break because they met the quota, you know, that type of thing. So, one thing that we've done by sharing the data and communicating the Censis AI Square with the staff is, we've actually increased our tray volumes for our assembly over 5,000 trays per month across our system with the same amount of staff. And, and then we haven't really increased any resources at all. But I mean, that's huge when you really think about each employee is averaging between anywhere, I guess, about 23 trays on average per shift. So, but just by communicating the power of having data to our staff and our leadership even has been fantastic. So, and when I was talking to Seamus earlier in this process, there's nothing out there in our industry that can help us like this. So this is a pretty amazing process for us.
And Jeff, you were talking about posting it for the staff to see, and that absolutely gets results. It even drove a little competition for some of my staff, which I reap the benefits of. They did too, but I had historically been producing my own data gathering, Excel spreadsheets, and I'd try to do a line graph, and I'm trying to I wanted my team and my department to know what they were doing and where they were at, and so we put they were already used to seeing that. They know the third or fourth day of the month the new numbers are up. Excuse me. Let's go see where we're at. And so when we started working on this AI project, I put both up. I put the work that I had been doing, very labor intensive, and I posted the new AI stuff, printed it directly off, put it right beside mine. I said, "Hey guys, new platform. Let me know what you think." Well, when you give an open invitation to staff like that, most of the time you don't really get any. Well, I want you to know they almost all hurt my feelings. They like much more aesthetic AI instead of my bars and lines and graphs and raw numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of a nerd. I like the raw numbers. Well, they don't. They like the visual. I even had bars and graphs, but for whatever reason, they like Seamus's version a lot better than they did mine. So they hurt my feelings.
Oh yeah,
but it's okay. It's all right. It's for a good cause.
Beth gets all the credit for making the bars and graphs and making them pretty.
Yeah, well, she did good. She did well.
So Jeff, dashboards are part of the thing that you really appreciate about Censis AI Squared productivity. So talk to us a little bit about that dashboard aspect, and also just how this program helped kind of transform you from being reactive to maybe being a little bit more proactive on the SPD side.
Okay, so when I got here about 14 months ago, a couple months into it, I was invited to be a part of an OR optimization study. And some of the feedback that we had gotten, and we commonly hear this in our industry, is that SPD is like, it's a mess. Things just aren't happening well. Everything was reporting and data was largely retroactive about key notifications or alerts, patient safety reports. Everything was retroactive, or we weren't proactive at all. So one thing that we had done, we had gone through the information, and we said we need to be more proactive. For my scrub tech days, one of the key words was being to anticipate what the surgeon needs when you're passing instruments. And SPD was not doing that well at all either. So one of the biggest factors they had mentioned in this study was, the lack of a view. We didn't have OR scheduler at the time. We didn't have, the OR boards and that tells OR schedule boards in decontam and the prep side. We do now. And so we do have OR scheduler. We're scanning at different process points now. So we've incorporated a lot of their suggestions. Well, actually, they don't give you the suggestions. They tell you what the problems are. It's up to the customer to develop an action plan. And that's one thing I had done with Seamus and Censis was I brought some of those recommendations from the consulting company to Censis. And I think what we were able to develop or create as far as what the voice of what St. Luke's needs actually meets what we needed, exactly what we needed. So one thing that we had realized was our existing technology had not been optimized or even built. We had no standardization of how to use the information, the technology we were using. So we had a lot of work to do, and that's why the timing was perfect on a lot of the technology that we've incorporated since then.
I think that's really well put, Jeff, and just that transition from reactivity to proactivity and creating that action plan once you have the data in place. I think that's really, really well put. So when it comes to productivity and efficiency issues or bottlenecks in SPD processes, what were you experiencing and what challenges were you really experiencing in your departments? Jeff, let's go to you first. How did you go about improving that communication and collaboration within your departments?
Well, what somebody who was smarter than I said that the source of every problem is poor communication. So what I've done, this is through a lot of suggestions from the C-suite, my coaches and peers here, and even my staff. We've set up daily calls where I meet with all my leaders for 15 minutes every morning. And they present certain data to me, like what is the WIP, the work in progress, number of trays down. Is mechanical equipment all working? And if it's not, what's the plan? Staffing, and those are the three primary types of things we discuss. But before I have that meeting, I normally review the ConCensis AI Square, and I look for any kind of trends or any kind of issues, so that way I'm prepared when I get on the phone with those folks, and I have a good view, or sort of like that air traffic controller type thing. And that's one thing I had expressed to Seamus and Beth and the other folks at ConCensis when I was first becoming familiar with this. Is I told them I wanted to be an air traffic controller. I wanted to sit in front of a computer that was set up like a true automobile dashboard. I can see how fast I'm going, or if I'm not going at all, how much fuel I have left in the gas tank, those types of things. So those were the types of things we worked on with bottlenecks. The right staff in the right place at the right time is always an issue. The employees would always say, we don't have enough staff. We don't have enough staff, but never any solutions on how to do that. We need more staff. And that's the last thing that any leader wants to tell the C-suite is they need more staff, unless you can actually prove it. So, we discussed earlier about having metrics and data to prove that. So that's my bottlenecking.
And ConCensis AI Squared productivity helped you find those bottlenecks, right? Because finding it, identifying and then working through them is a time-consuming process, right?
Exactly. So what we realized is we were working through inefficiencies and ineffectiveness. We observed the whole process. We had manual processes that were still being handwritten, even though we had an instrument tracking system. And we could tell that by the ConCensis AI Square that we just didn't have the data. We looked at our average WIP, for our larger sites, our WIP every day was about 125 trays. At one time, it was 400 trays. It was before we had implemented a lot of this type of technology. Medium sites, we had 60 trays on our WIP. At small sites, we had about 30. One thing that we did do is any kind of updates with the ConCensis AI Square is we got the employees involved, and they were actually able to help just decipher the data, interpret the data, and come forward with a lot of ideas on how to make improvements. So now what we're seeing is our WIP, even at the large sites is about 10, and small sites sometimes we're 0. And in my consulting days as a SPD consultant, we had and even in my lean background, we had realized that if you zero out every day, which some facilities like you to zero out, it's really not cost effective, because now you have staff with no work to do, that type of thing. And we know that the work will be coming through. So one of the biggest advantages of having data was figuring out where we had, traditional staffing. You have day shift, you have second shift, and you have the third shift. what we realize, is what most of us notice just through experience is that decontamination becomes busy around 10 a.m., 11 a.m. in the morning. And sometimes you need split shifts and that type of thing. But just as that's happening, you have your day shift going to lunch. And so that creates problems as well. So when I can see the data on a line chart where we're busiest and in which area, then we can shuffle individuals around. We learned that some sites are busy Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, nothing on Thursday and Friday.
That's right. That's right, Cody. And that really brings us to kind of we've talked a lot about staffing throughout this conversation, but that's really a thing, right? Is you're able to put staff in a place where you're going to need them most, which increases efficiency, right?
Oh, absolutely. And we had, when I first got here, we had kind of the standard, if you will, schedules laid out for a CS department, and they were adequate. They were working. There were labor hours being wasted on the front end by multiples of employees. And then there were shortcomings at lunch, and the hours, the schedules that the employees were working, they were pretty standard. They were pretty normal across the industry, and that leads me back to what I was saying earlier. When I ask X number of employees to just tweak your schedule a little bit, an hour up, 2 hours back. Whatever that case may be. And so when we started, probably 60 days into seeing the data come out of the AI squared, that's when we started, moving. We started looking at it, almost immediately. We actually started making changes probably 60 days in, and we made those changes around the data that we were seeing based on scans. And so, we were backing employees up, an hour, and an hour doesn't seem like it would make that big of a change. But that takes me back to, I changed an employee schedule by 1 hour. Now they're here the same amount of time, debatably working just as hard, but they're doing more in the same amount of time with the same amount of effort. And all it was a tweak of their schedule. And so, we don't have everybody starts here, everybody ends here. And then the next one comes in, everybody starts here, everybody ends here. And so it's a lot more stair-stepped, and it's built around the throughput of surgery or the expected throughput of surgery instead of me being a manager. And it's a lot easier to say, I got 10 people starting at 9, I got 15 starting at noon, I got 20 coming in at 3, whatever your numbers are. So now I've got, 2 starting early, coming in, make sure we've got multiple people that have that same skill set for the testing and all those things, handle any, emergencies from overnight, that type thing. And then we don't really see people start coming in until 10 o'clock or later because, some of those people drop into decontam, and, there's not really work waiting on them until I've got cases start, then stop, then go through the entire decontam process, and then a 20 to 30 minute washer cycle. And then the trays are out and they can be assembled. No real point in having staff here waiting on that process to happen. And typically, this is December, we're late fourth quarter, so, everything's different. But typically, we start the day out fresh and clean, almost no trays down, very little to no trays down. And so I would literally have staff, we would be looking for stuff for them to do on a regular basis.
Yeah, Cody, if I could jump in for 1 second. I had recently seen an article where it said only 20% of all instruments on trays are actually used in the operating room. And, and I get why the other 80% need to be there. Surgeons may or may not, different surgeons need different things, but for the most part, only 20% of instruments are being used during surgeries. And the reason I bring that up is because one thing that Seamus and I have talked about a lot is complexity of trays and standardization. And this is one thing that Seamus and I talked about in the early days when we looked at, we have a tertiary care facility. We have 2 level 1, level 2 trauma centers. And then we have a bunch of other facilities that may do small things. Like our one facility does the top 3 trays are 2 are L&D trays. The third is dermatology, like Mohs trays. And so it's unfair to compare one facility to the other. And then one thing that we looked at with the complexity of the trays is, okay, well, these trays are very, very heavy. We're only getting 1 unit of service for a tray that might have 200 instruments in it. Whereas these other trays, we're getting 1 unit of service for maybe a tray that has 15 instruments in it. And so we looked at that complexity, and we worked with our OR partners, OR coordinators, and we're actually looking at, how we can streamline trays or maybe break trays into 2 because maybe they're overweight, that kind of thing. So the standardization function and the ConCensis AI Square is amazing.
Yeah, it is. Jeff, I actually had in my notes here, I was going to ask you if you guys took advantage of that complexity option when they rolled that out to us. I'm like, man, that is going to be great. Yeah. And then like the reality of it set in, and I'm like, Seamus, dude, that's awesome. That's an amazing tool, but I don't have hours to go through and assign complexities to all these trays. And he's like, you know what? We got you. Here's the plan. Here's how we'll do it, and this is the best way. And so we took Seamus's plan and we executed it. I don't know, a 2-hour investment maybe. We'll be, generous and say 3-hour investment. And man, the vision that was obscured. It really was eye-opening, not only to me, but to my staff as well. And so, if you've ever heard me speak, I say almost every time I speak, not all trays are equal, because they're not. Not all trays are equal. I've got techs that are cranking out 50 trays a day. That's great. They're camera trays. I've got other techs that are cranking out, 12 and 15 trays. Well, those are slightly more complex trays. Those are not the same thing. And so when you're cranking out 10 trays that have a complexity of a 5 on a 1 to 5 scale, that's impressive. And then come back and have it coupled with, an error rate or, whatever terminology you're going to use for that, but to be able to measure that too.
Yeah, the other area where the complexity helped us is with the COVID, with the supply chain shortages and things like that. We actually had POs that were over a year old that had still not been fulfilled. I mean, we're talking a couple hundred POs for instruments just at one site. The instruments just weren't coming in. So what folks were doing, where they were looking at alternative companies with mid-grade instruments, even though they're still surgical quality, they're still mid-grade. Our policy here at our facility, we stress quality so much. We only allow premium grade instrumentation into our operating room. No mid grade, even though it's operating room allowed. But we only allow premium grade. So what we had to do was, with that complexity and then updated count sheets, is we looked at how we could best use the available resources that we had at the time, which trays were not being used. I love that ability. Our major trays, obviously, if anybody has major trays, are probably your number one used tray. But our soft tissue trays, for example, I think we had like 11 of them at one site, but we were needing like 13 every time we used them. And so, we either had to borrow them from a different site, or we had to figure out a way to accommodate the operating room for that day. So standardization, I can't say enough about standardization across the board, no matter whether it's your supply chain, whether it's your staffing, whether it's the SBD functions, and I cannot say enough about maintenance, which falls in that category of complexity of trays. If the tray's too complex, your error rates are just going to go way up. It's too difficult, especially when you have staffing coming on board with no prior experience. Open heart trays, they're notorious for having to be perfect. Not only perfect as according to the count sheet, but the way it's set up. I mean, you OR folks that are doing open hearts, they want that wire cutter in a specific spot. They want the sternal retractor in a certain spot and ready to go. Some facilities want their sternal retractor separated, but most open heart facilities, especially trauma, they want that Finicetto retractor assembled and in the position of function. And they want it right on top because when they crack a chest, they're going to need those certain types of things. So even though the count sheet might be correct, the way the tray is set up, if the tray is too complicated, it's not advantageous for throughput workflows and those new folks. It just upset. I want to say upset. It just doesn't help them to put out a quality product when it's too complex.
So Seamus, from your perspective, Jeff and Cody have worked, with this for a while and have been using this solution for quite some time. What are you hearing from other customers? What are you hearing from the rest of the market?
Good question. So similar stories. We've, as you know, we launched this officially a month ago, got quite a bit of interest from lots of customers across the industry and very, very similar stories. The key points are, really having visibility to data and being able to communicate with data, having those data-driven conversations. Like Cody was talking about, when you make changes, there's a downstream impact of those changes. You change somebody's schedule. That's a big deal for a person. And so there's making changes in a lot of cases is expensive, and you want to have data to back that up before you make those kinds of decisions. So yeah, lots of very similar stories. Lots of interesting things in the data too. I think so. Jeff said, he thought maybe major trays were the most commonly used trays. I think what we see is the Stryker camera and light cord trays are the most commonly used. Probably just because there's so many of them, which is kind of interesting. Some of the other things we're looking at now are related to quality, looking for what correlates to higher defect rates. One of the things that we've actually found, which is kind of interesting, is the number of different kinds of trays a technician routinely assembles correlates with defect rates. So technicians who assemble lots of different kinds of trays on a regular basis have lower defect rates, which is really interesting. Our hypothesis, yeah, right. Our hypothesis, though, is that was a proxy for experience, that the more experienced technicians are probably the ones working on more things.
Probably a lower complacency, too. You do the same handful of trays all the time. There's a certain amount of comfort that comes with it. So I guess maybe.
Yeah. So it's all kinds of really interesting insights in there.
Yeah, and Seamus and I, when you and I were talking, we were talking about bottlenecks and WIP, work in progress. The number of trays that are down, directly correlates to defects or quality issues, because now what we have disorganization, right? The bottlenecks, people are rushing, taking shortcuts. One of my phrases I live and die by is no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts. There's no middle ground between sterile and unsterile, right? The WIP, same thing with the WIP, the number of trays that are down. We have folks rushing to get trays done. And that's when the mistakes happen. Like, you ask yourself, how can somebody miss an indicator? How come this person can miss 5 indicators in less than a month? It just seems so simple and so repetitious. They should never forget an indicator or a filter. But it's because, we're rushing because there's a problem with the workflow, or there's bottlenecks, or there's just a lot of work. Cleanliness and organization and workflow. Those are top 3 areas on my list of things to do to make sure we're working correctly. And unless with so many sites that I have, unless I have some kind of dashboard that tells me, that all those 3 objectives are being met, it's hard for me to lead from afar. And that's what this solves for me. It doesn't solve the 100% of the problem, but it gets pretty close to 100%, because you still have to go to the area and observe, right? You still have to meet the people. and those types of things. But I tell you what, I go to bed at night and I get good sleep knowing that I made the right decisions that day. And
Jeff, you were talking about your dashboard. So let's say pre Census AI, did you have any kind of dashboard? Did you have a presentation of data to your team?
The only thing that I had really was charts that I was doing in Excel, pivot tables, like the line charts, like
when
you do.
Would do that, like how much time were you spending on that to present the information to your team?
Well, it's funny you asked that because it took about two and a half days or per week.
Yeah, so it's the same thing for me. So I like the raw numbers, but a lot of my staff they like the visual, right? And so, man, the end of month come, third, fourth day in, I got all these numbers. I'm putting all these reports together, and then putting it in Excel and manipulating it, and then you got to make it somewhat presentable, right? So hours. If I didn't get any interruption, it would take me a full day's dedication. Well, I don't know about you, but it's pretty rare that I don't get interruption. But I mean, so how much time do you dedicate to it now that you've got Census AI compared to when you were like producing your own like I was?
Probably an hour. No, I'm not even kidding. So the biggest problem with putting charts together and all this, you probably noticed already, is it's not really putting the chart together. That may take 2 or 3 hours, if you're using old Excel. The problem is getting the data, finding the data. I mean, Census has great reports and all, but you might have to pull multiple reports. I might have to go into our timekeeper system and pull out, time data from there. I might have to go back into our schedule, pull out data from there, and then once you get all that data, and it's kind of like, okay, is this data really correct? And then is my math right, or am I putting the right formulas together? That was one problem I had with the Excel is formulas.
There's always kind of nervous about that too. But now, like you were saying, I go in, adjust the filters, hit print. Go stick it on the communication board. I mean, that's it.
And I saw the ability to create my own charts with the drill downs, and I can export it to Excel, those types of things. That's the nice thing about it. I can pick and choose the data I need when I need it. And, even though the reports are available, for, going really deep into a topic or subject, it's nice to have that information right at your fingertips.
I think that's really, really well put. And we've covered a lot of ground here. And I think a lot of what we've said kind of lends itself to this last question that I'll ask here. But what would Jeff and Cody, what would you guys say to other hospitals that might be evaluating this tool?
Well, I would say to other hospitals, sometimes it's tough for any hospital, especially maybe post-COVID supply chain issues. Everyone's worried about a recession. You have to invest. You have to pay it forward sometimes, kind of thing. At least give new technology a look. We can pay consultants hundreds of thousands of dollars to tell us we have problems. Well, we already know we have communication problems. We already know we have technology problems. I don't need to spend couple $100,000 for someone to tell me that. We have to identify the problems, and the problems are, like I said earlier, is poor communication, and not having the right data at the right time. And so I think if somebody gave you a crystal ball, and the crystal ball gave you the answers, I mean, why not take a look at it, or why not try it? That's the key, is trying it. And and then talk to others who have used it. And Cody and I have a passion for this type of stuff because we've seen it work. I mean, I'm getting 5,000 more trays a month now with the same amount of staff. I'm going from 150 WIP to 0 WIP, or 10 trays for WIP. No longer seeing the bottlenecks. When I asked for staff, I asked for 4 additional staff, and I was shocked when the president approved it. I asked for float positions. I had to build that program from the ground up. I got it. I asked for a quality coordinator, an educator, and a database resource coordinator. I got it.
Jeff, you
don't
got those things
things
because you had the data to support it, though, right? And so
exactly,
you have to be able to. So your question, Tyler, was about presenting the C-suite, and you have to be able to demonstrate to them a return on investment. It doesn't matter if you work for a for-profit hospital or a not-for-profit hospital. Even not-for-profit hospitals, they're not for a loss either. You know what I mean? And so they have a bottom line. And so, as leaders in the SPD world, when you get to a certain point, you have to study the business side of it as much or more than the clinical side of it. There's an expectation that if you're here, that if you're having these conversations, you've got the clinical know-how, the clinical skill set, and at least the ability to find the information if you don't already have it. But now we're going to challenge you with a business aspect, business acumen of it. And if you want a new toy, that's fine. Come sell it to me and tell me how it's going to make me money or how I'm going to break even on it or how it's going to benefit the facility in the long run. And, some of the ways, so everything has dollar signs tied to it, right? It doesn't matter if you're talking about tracking systems, containers, instruments themselves, surgeries. They've all got dollar signs, labor. So the most expensive thing in your department is probably labor. It might be capital, but it's probably labor.
It's your highest cost, definitely.
Yeah. Usually between 45 and 65%, depending on market and a whole bunch of other things that we won't get into. But when you can say that this program or this addendum or this add-on is X amount of dollars, and then I can say, look, I can take and spend this money here, and then with it, I've seen where it's demonstrated. I made a few tweaks that didn't cost anything. There was a certain amount of risk in making the changes, but there was no cost in making the changes. And now all of a sudden I'm getting more for the money I'm already spending, right? There's your return on investment. And then you come back. And one of the things, Jeff, you may have looked at this. I don't know that it just hit me. The reminder did is this also allows you to look at future capital purchases. And so that's one of the things that I remember as we were going through early in on this, Seamus, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that we looked at is the throughput, the time, the season allowed us to determine, are the number of sterilizers we've got, are they really truly adequate? We weren't tracking like when the sterilizers were down or anything like that, but we were tracking the possible throughput and the throughput based on when it was all happening. And so there were certain things that will allow us to better make those decisions. You know what I mean? Whether we really didn't need to make that investment or not make that investment. And then, like I was saying, everything's got a dollar attached to it. So error rates have dollars tied to them. Trays that were supposed to be sterile and are not, those have dollars assigned to them because tray was supposed to be up and it's not. You've delayed a case. How much is OR per minute? You had a tray that was received that was contaminated, right? And so you've either started a domino effect, and so your SPD staff or a percentage of your SPD, they have to stop everything, take care of this tray. So everything else stops, take care of this tray to get it decontaminated properly and then to get it sterilized properly. But they had to stop everything else. Well, you know what happens to that domino? It goes down the hill, right? And so all that stuff can be measured. And, you've almost been given a predictive tool, if nothing else, an insight to now see these things.
Cody, if I could add, you had a good thought there that made me think about something. Every SPD manager has been called into the operating room to speak to a surgeon, sometimes during a case. I know I have a couple of times.
That's
and
never happened.
What they say to you, right? So what I commonly hear is, I want to know how this happened. I want to know how it happened. I want to know why it happened. I want to know what you're going to do about it. Right. So the surgeon will say, I want to know why it happened. I want to know how it happened. And I want to know what you're going to do about it. And you're standing there on the carpet in the dark room with bright lights facing on the patient. And, you got 10 people staring at you, wondering what you're going to say. And so those are difficult positions for new leaders, especially, to be in, but even for seasoned leaders to be in that position. And, I've learned that, the best answer I can give is, I can't tell you that right at this moment, but I promise you I'll investigate, I'll find out where the problems are, and I'll develop an action plan. But the key to that is, it's all a journey, right? You can take an hour to get to the journey, or you can take a week to get to the journey. You still get the same results. But the fact is, the sooner you get it, that proactive part that Tyler and I were talking about earlier, instead of being retroactive and that kind of thing, is you can get an answer for that surgeon, hopefully maybe even before the time they leave the operating room. And I think that goes a long way. I did have one leader yesterday. She reached out to a doctor with something and followed up on something. And he said, you know what? You're the first person that's ever reached out to me from SPD. And he really appreciated it and gave her his cell phone number, and they swapped phone numbers. So that's relationship building right there.
Man, this is incredible stuff, and just a lot of I think fantastic testament to the power of this platform and what it can provide for organizations. We're going to have to wrap it up there because we've covered a lot of ground here today. So, guys, thank you again so much for joining us here on this episode of ConCensis. Jeff Long, Cody Trout, and Seamus Johnson. Guys, thank you again so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys. It was my pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you for tuning into another episode of ConCensis. We appreciate it very much. Of course, for more, make sure to subscribe to the podcast to stay up to date with the latest episodes. But for this episode, for Cody, Jeff, and Seamus, I'm Tyler Kern. We'll talk to you next time.